You found the skeleton. How would you tell it's a dinosaur? You personally, how would you decide?
Well, interesting question. I don't know. I'd have to do some research on that.
Hey there YouTube, the Dapper Dinosaur here. It's time for the final video in this series. When last we left off, Andrew Snelling was trying to support accelerated nuclear decay by a combination of lying, omission, and circular reasoning. Let's see what else he has for us, shall we?
And we can explain this disparity in the ages by a systematic process that was going on to dealing with the strength of the nuclear forces holding. God only had to change slightly the holding of the atoms within the nucleus, and it would speed up the decay rates.
Wow, I'm actually happy he proposed a mechanism. And that's the one that I also identified as the mechanism that could cause this. But let's remember that Snelling puts all of the Paleozoic and Mesozoic rocks as flood rocks. We can assume that the radioactive decay in, say, the Precambrian was just already there as part of God lying about how old the Earth is. That still means that we need to fit 470 million years of radioactive decay into about 1 year of time. That means everything needs to decay 470 million times faster than normal. That means you're going to need a drop in the strength of the nuclear forces that's sufficient to account for that. That wouldn't just speed up the rate of decay, it would mean that previously some nuclides that were previously stable would suddenly find that forces like the electromagnetic force are suddenly strong enough to make previously stable nuclei radioactive. We should see evidence of novel decay chains and depletion of nuclides that would be newly radioactive. We don't see this. Of course, there's also no mechanism by which to weaken the nuclear forces, but I guess we can take that one step at a time.
So if these assumptions are not correct,
which they either are or can be checked on,
then they can't possibly accurately yield absolute ages of claimed millions of years.
Well, again, the ages would be absolute, even if they're wrong, because in this context, all the word absolute means is that the age is expressed in terms of a number and a unit of time, such as a year.
Assumption number one, all the daughter atoms is derived from parent atoms.
Which is not an assumption in isochron dating, and can be checked for. And the older the rock is, the less important this assumption is.
Violated by inheritance.
Yeah, which we can check on, as evidenced by the fact that Snelling himself cited Dalrymple doing just that in a real science paper, as opposed to a silly blog like the one that Snelling edits for Answers in Genesis.
No other processes have affected the parent-daughter relationship.
Which again can be checked for by doing things like sampling from different parts of the rock, not ignoring metamorphism, etc. And of course, ignoring metamorphism is something Snelling has admitted to doing on his blog, and then he pretended that his intentional misuse of radiometric dating was a problem for the technique. As if leaning on the bathroom sink while weighing yourself so you have a lower number on the scale was a problem with scales.
Violated by contamination.
Again, something you can check for, and I know Snelling knows this because he reported on real papers that were about detecting contamination in rocks.
Assumption number three, constant decay rates.
Not only is it near as anyone can tell physically impossible to vary these, we don't see evidence of them having varied. Further, there are other possible implications of this. There are really only two ways to vary the nuclear forces, changing the coupling constants, or changing the speed of light. We don't know what the effects of the first would be, but the effects of the second would affect kinetics, chemistry, even time, all of which are tied to the speed of light. I guess then we can probably rule out a change to the speed of light, since so much of the creationist model depends on Earth surviving in a recognizable way, which wouldn't happen if things as basic as mechanics, chemistry, and time were fundamentally altered.
Violated by accelerated decay rates.
Which again are impossible, and for which we have no evidence besides that it would make Snelling feel better if they were a thing. By that logic, I must have $1 billion in my checking account.
So by the way, you think about it for a moment.
Oh, I've been thinking about it way longer than that.
A lava flow that formed in the first month of the canyon, first month of the flood year, it's at the bottom of the Grand Canyon.
It's like he forgot his own flood model. The Cardenas basalt is from Precambrian rock, which normally to Snelling means pre-flood.
It's gonna tick through a year of accelerated decay.
Great, I look forward to Snelling showing us all the things like decay halos from nuclides that were radioactive, but no longer are.
Whereas a lava flow formed at the top of the Grand Canyon in the last month of the flood, say, is only going to tick through a month of accelerated decay, so it will give a younger ages.
Yeah, sure. I'm not arguing that accelerated decay wouldn't leave the relative dates obtained by the radiometric dating intact. That seems reasonable. You should still be able to see which igneous rocks are younger or older, radiometrically, if you had just a universal decrease in the strength of the weak and strong nuclear interactions in the nucleus.
So that's why the results seem to be in a systematic order, because it reflects the order in which they were formed during the flood.
See, though, that also means that short of accelerated decay, then radiometric dating is reliable. Because in order for this to be the case, then the other so-called assumptions must be broadly applicable to the rocks of Earth. Otherwise, there would be little if any correlation between the date obtained and the actual age, regardless of whether decay was accelerated or not. Snelling is trying to have his cake and eat it too. Either the dates are reliable in terms of relative dating, and therefore problems like inherited daughter products and contamination are not problems to the technique as a whole, or those are problems for the technique as a whole, and relative dates are unreliable even under a young Earth creationist framework.
But the ages aren't absolute, they're just relative.
Well, he's doubling down, so I guess we really don't have to worry about contamination or inheritance, according to Snelling. Odd, then, that he'd spend so much of the first part of this talk complaining about them.
Well, the evolutionary scientists, why do they claim, therefore, and ignore these assumptions?
They don't.
Well, it's because they give them the result they want.
Nope, there's no reason to think that the scientists want particular results. Scientists are there to find out what the data indicate, and if you can show that their conclusions are unwarranted, you get to publish about that to their chagrin. Generally, scientists don't care if a rock is 3 million, 30 million, or 300 million years old. They just want to know the right answer as closely as they can. Remember, geology was started by Christians. They didn't have as a goal trying to disprove the Bible. It's just that what they found in the rocks disproved at least some readings of the Bible.
Okay?
No, it's not okay. Snelling just accused basically all of geology of knowingly committing academic fraud, which is rich coming from the guy who hid cracks in a rock by putting people in front of the visible cracks. That's a serious accusation, and there has been nothing put forth here, or ever, that would back that up.
And the isochron technique, that's multiple samples, eliminates the need to know the initial conditions.
Yes, it does, which means that one of his big objections just holds no water.
And supposedly indicates contamination.
Well, yes it does, which eliminates another of his big objections, bringing us down to just the complaint that we don't know if decay rates were constant, except that, yes, we do, because there's no evidence of a weakening of 2 of the 4 fundamental forces of the universe, which is something that wouldn't be exactly subtle if it had occurred.
But that's not always the case.
Oh? I hope we're going to be given some examples demonstrating this.
And the reason why they say the methods work is because they give them the ages they want. You see, think about it.
I am thinking about it, and this is literally a conspiracy theory. This is exactly the kind of anti-science thinking that is why so many creationists are anti-vaxxers, anti-maskers, etc. When you go around with absolutely no evidence accusing the entire scientific community of fraud, which is pretty rich coming from Snelling in particular, can there be any wonder that your audience will be broadly anti-science? The brute fact remains that when dollars are on the line, radiometric dating works. You can check for contamination, and starting conditions can be eliminated from the question. Spontaneous decay, the kind of decay that matters, cannot vary without changing the laws of nature, which itself would be detectable if it had happened. That's why scientists treat it as reliable, within the conditions and with the caveats that are known for the technique. It's not because old ages give them the warm fuzzies.
If there weren't millions of years, there'd be no time for evolution to occur.
True, but the average geologist couldn't care less about that. In fact, early on in the history of evolution, most old-age geologists didn't think the Earth had been around long enough, even if it had been around too long for young Earth creationists. And it's not like they changed their mind to accommodate evolution. That eventually the 2 branches of science, biology and geology, converged on mutually compatible histories of the Earth, it's not a point against them, but a point for them. There's no reason they should be able to do this other than that both models are reasonably accurate ways to describe the world and its history. Imagine thinking that corroboration from other parts of science is a bad thing, actually. Creationism really is brain rot. Snelling is blatantly peddling anti-intellectual conspiracy, and his audience is just lapping it up. I wish they were as good at critical thinking as they are at hiring graphic designers to design church logos.
Why did Charles Darwin's idea of evolution take off in 1859?
I mean, it didn't really. It had a lot of pushback from very famous geologists and biologists, including Sir Richard Owen and Darwin's own friend Charles Lyell. It's true that it had its early proponents in figures like Thomas Henry Huxley and the much maligned Ernst Haeckel, but it was not dominant, and while basic faunal succession and common descent was accepted somewhat rapidly, things like natural and sexual selection as dominant forces in shaping organisms wouldn't really be the consensus for decades into the 20th century, with people still, despite all the evidence supporting things like orthogenesis and saltationism, well into the early parts of the 20th century.
Well, it was because 20 years earlier, 30 years earlier, Charles Lyell had promoted the idea of millions of years.
Weird how no one noticed that it took years for Lyell to even start coming around to Darwin's side.
And Darwin dedicated his book on the origin of species to Charles Lyell, because without the millions of years, you can't get time for evolution.
Lyell didn't, at the time of publication, provide enough evidence for Darwin. In fact, Darwin notes as much in The Origin of Species in all editions until the last, when finally geology was proving less a thorn in his side. The more likely reason for a dedication is that Lyell was a friend of Darwin's, and while not a supporter of evolution by natural selection for much of his life, he had encouraged Darwin to publish his theory because A, he was by all indication a good friend who cared about Darwin, and wanted him to succeed, and B, just because a scientist doesn't think an idea is correct, doesn't mean he doesn't think it's worthy of consideration by his peers. Oh, also one minor thing, you know what The Origin of Species lacks? A dedication page. Lyell is thanked for his encouragement to publish and his help in getting that done, but technically the book's not dedicated to him. Just one more case of Snelling spreading misinformation. Granted, this is fairly minor, but still, it goes to show that you really can't trust anything Snelling says, no matter how trivial. If this guy told me the sky was blue, I'd go outside to check.
And that's why the age of the Earth is such a critical issue.
Except that, as we saw in the late 19th century, geologists don't really care, and if they thought the world was too young for evolution on the basis of the evidence they have, then they'd say so. And if that upsets evolutionary biologists, well, that's their problem. This entire conspiracy, like most conspiracies, is completely ahistorical.
Well, very quickly, how reliable and objective are the measured decay rates anyway?
Extremely, and let's remember, they're not just measured, they're also the predicted outcome of the most mathematically accurate branch of physics ever to exist, particle physics. For example, the decay rates of thorium-235 and uranium-235 were known with a margin of error of less than 0.2% and a confidence of 2 sigma, which is to say that the chance of an actual value being outside that range at all is about 4.6% or so. But the further outside that range, the less likely that value is to be accurate, which means that we have a very precise measurement of the half-lives. And while the confidence interval isn't exactly 5 sigma, it's also not at a level that would allow for the age of the Earth to only be 6,000 years old. But if you wanted to argue on the basis of the somewhat modest sigma value that the Earth was, say, 4.4 billion years old rather than 4.5 billion years old, I won't stop you. Indeed, it's also not like people aren't continuing to check this. 2 of the papers I looked at for this measurement of half-life of nuclides were published in 2017 and 2018. And what do you know, their results are within the margin of error of the established rates.
And there are 2 parameters by which decay rates are measured and expressed. There's what we call the half-life.
Just make sure you watch out for head crabs.
Okay, you've heard that expression, some of you, the half-life. Well, it's basically this: if you start with a pound of uranium, after 1 half-life, there's only half a pound left.
Well, only if the pound of uranium was all of the same isotope, which is nearly impossible, but sure.
After another half-life, you've only got 1/4 of a pound left.
Yep, importantly, you always get half the remaining part. It's not that after 2 half-lives, the sample vanishes. Now, I know what you're thinking. Dapper. That's so obvious, why are you even saying it? Well, it's because I've had creationists directly tell me to my dinosaur face that after 2 half-lives, everything should be gone. That's how scientifically illiterate creationists can be. Now, granted, usually not the pros, but the fact that someone can be so into creationist literature and content that they'd want to defend the ideas publicly against me while being so scientifically ignorant should be seen as an indictment of the results of the project of creationism. It breeds scientific ineptitude at very basic levels. Creationism is bad for you. My hope is that I'm doing my small part to inoculate my audience against it.
And so it decreases with time. Okay, so that's a measure of the radioactive decay rate.
That's true.
And these methods, there's 3 methods that have been used to measure these decay rates. Yes, you can do it. You can do a direct counting. You can take a pound of uranium, you can stick a Geiger counter and let it tick for a year. Now, you all chemists know, don't you? The chemists know that there's There's Avogadro's number, isn't it? 6 times 10 to the 23 atoms in a mole.
If we're only doing one significant figure, then yes, that is the correct value.
Okay, so you can work out how many radioactive uranium atoms are in that pound of uranium. The Geiger counter measures how many decayed in a year, so you can work out the decay rate. It's not that difficult.
Broadly, because you need to isolate different isotopes, you're not likely to be using a whole pound of uranium, but that's not really all that important. I think that mass of uranium was included to be illustrative and easy to think about. So I won't come down on Andy for that.
And you can measure, start with a sample with no daughters in it and leave it on the bench. And after a year, you can measure how many daughters there are. And so that's what we call in-growth, measurement of the daughter isotopes.
Again, this isn't so much a correction as extra information. You actually can start with daughter product in the initial sample. You just have to measure its relative abundance at the start of the measurement so you can correct for it.
Or you can compare the radioisotope ages, and here's where it gets tricky. Let me explain this, okay? Over the last 70 or so years, they've tried to determine the half-life of potassium-40, and they say it's 1.248 billion years. But because there are uncertainties...
Which, remember, there are in literally all measurements of any kind.
How do they ultimately derive that number?
I don't know, Andy. How do they?
Well, they do it by taking a sample that they know the age of from uranium-lead dating.
A reliable technique that we've been given no valid reason to reject on the whole, provided that, like all measurements, the measurement is done correctly.
And if they get a different potassium-argon date, they change the decay rate for potassium to make the age agree with the uranium age.
If this were true, then the decay rate for potassium-40 should be fluctuating all over the place in the literature. I can't seem to find anything that indicates this. So, unless Andy is going to provide it, I'm going to have to conclude that he's lying. And of course, remember, the vast majority of radiometric dates are concordant, so this isn't even something that could come up very often. And given the ubiquity of concordance, the much simpler explanation for a discordant potassium-argon date is just contamination or leaching.
Well, that's a bit sneaky, isn't it?
It would be, but is it really going on? Also, hey, remember that time that Snelling showed his audience Green River Formation fossils and told them that they were too pristinely preserved to be the result of anything but a flood? Except that the Green River Formation is a Cenozoic lake bed, meaning that according to Snelling himself, they're post-flood? Kind of sneaky, isn't it?
That's a bit sneaky.
It would be, but is it really going on? Also, hey, remember that time that Snelling showed his audience Green River Formation fossils and told them that they were too pristinely preserved to be the result of anything but a flood? Except that the Green River Formation is a Cenozoic lake bed, meaning that according to Snelling himself, they're post-flood? Kind of sneaky, isn't it?
Well, here's another example.
There was no first example. There was just a bald assertion with nothing to back it up. So at best, this is going to be the first example.
Determinations of the rubidium-strontium decay rate, 48.8 billion years.
Quite the decay rate.
Well, they've used Earth materials and meteorites, compared with only 2 groups of analyses, and they've got differences.
They disagree according to his own source by a whopping 2%, and the indication is that the half-life is actually 2% longer. So tell you what, if Snelling wants to argue that the Earth is actually 4.634 billion years old instead of 4.543 billion years old, I won't fight him on that.
And so the only way they can reconcile these is by, again, taking the age of the known age by uranium-lead and adjusting the decay rate of rubidium so they get the samples to agree with the same age. Again, they're tweaking the sleight of hand here to change the decay rate determination
by 2%. This is exactly like if you and I drove separate cars on the same route from, say, Orlando, Florida to Seattle, Washington. We both reset our trip meters, and mine read 3,104 miles, and yours said 3,043 miles. Oh no, we disagree by 61 miles out of over 3,000. Okay, that probably means someone needs to check their trip meter, but then here comes Snelling to say that actually, because of this difference in measured drive distances, the more likely option is that actually the trip might have been 22 feet. You know, a distance that wouldn't even get you past a single building within Orlando. I'm not kidding. That is the level of difference between the measured age of the Earth and Snelling's preferred age.
To match so the ages agree. What we've just seen, there's evidence that the ages don't agree, but they're making them agree deliberately.
While the rock only has one age, and absent known reasons to doubt the better established age, the most likely cause of this is an error on the part of the previous estimates of decay rate. A much less likely option is that the laws of physics pulled a fast one, despite the fact that we know they didn't. And let's remember that ultimately the rate team, which included Snelling, didn't actually provide a reason that radiometric dating couldn't work. They failed and just concluded that, I guess it was all miracles. Next, he just does a repeat of the same point, except it's samarium. I'm not going to go over the exact same argument again. At best, his argument would mean that we have to stop using rubidium and samarium in dating, which would still leave us with a billions of years old Earth.
That's not very honest at all.
Something Snelling knows all about.
What about uranium, which is supposed to be the benchmark? 85 years of direct counting. Can we be certain that the half-lives are accurately known? Well, the interesting thing is, they're not accurately known.
All right, let's see it.
And the problem is that the ratio of the two uranium atoms, 238 and 235, isn't precisely known, because what they've found recently is that there's very significant differences in that ratio in different rocks, meteorites, and minerals.
Okay, but we can test for ratios in a particular rock and then use that knowledge to correct for this. I'm not seeing a problem here. In finding that this is the case, the solution to this alleged problem is also immediately known.
And so that means all the uranium-lead dates are not accurate.
By how much? Is it another case of 2% or so? Should we say that the Earth is actually only 4.443 billion years old? Remember, Snelling needs the decay rate to be wrong by 99.9999%. He needs it to be off by a factor of 756,000. This is a man who sees a fishmonger and a customer arguing about the weight of a halibut, with one person saying it's 176 kilograms and the other that it's 178 kilograms, and then Snelling comes by to propose that maybe they should actually accept the mass of 230 milligrams. You know, because it's reasonable that a fish about the same size as a human might weigh as much as 10 strands of hair.
That's interesting.
It is interesting. It's also not going to help young Earth creationism.
Here's some of this variation. I don't have time to, but you can see there that there's a great variation in different minerals and different meteorites.
I guess the editor didn't think it important to include the slide for this one.
And so there's uncertainties in these decay rates.
Yeah, that's how science works. There's uncertainty in everything, but an uncertainty of a few percent isn't the same thing as leaving the door open for a factor of 750,000 error. No one is proposing decay rates that are like 6 orders of magnitude off from any measured ones.
And these two problems make all the uranium-lead dating subject to large uncertainties.
Ah yes, large, another weasel word. How large? I can tell you it's a few percent, not many orders of magnitude. Snelling really would be on the deck of the Titanic, saying that maybe he can stop the ship from sinking if he stacks enough newspaper onto the bow as it's going vertical.
And if that's the case...
Which I guess technically it is, just not nearly to a level that could possibly help a young Earth.
Then all the other determinations have uncertainties.
They do. This is just why is science. I guess despite himself having successfully published in scientific journals, Snelling just missed the most basic aspects of science. Either that, or he does know that uncertainty is in every measurement possible and ever made, and he's just lying to his audience about that very basic fundamental fact of science. What say you? Does Snelling have no more understanding of science than a 6-year-old, or is he a liar? Put your guesses in the comments.
And therefore, none of the radioactive dating is accurate.
Non sequitur. Your facts are uncoordinated.
As we said before, inheritance, contamination.
Things that can be checked for, and in some cases even ignored depending on the techniques used.
Non-constant decay rates make all the radioactive dating methods totally unreliable and unusable.
It sure would be nice if we actually had any reason to think that decay rates changed. We don't, though.
And therefore...
Radiometric dating remains highly reliable, in use in numerous industries, and an absolute defeater for young Earth creationism. But of course, let's remember that even without it, there's no way for the rocks on Earth to all be laid down in the last 6,000 years, or even the Phanerozoic rocks, only to be laid down in that time. The reason the young Earth was abandoned in the 18th century wasn't that radiometric dating was invented. It hadn't been. It's because just the evident deposition and erosion couldn't be squared with a flood and a 6,000-year history. Radiometric dating could be shown to be completely useless, and it wouldn't actually make young Earth creationism plausible in the least. Young Earth creationism is lying on the floor with a sucking chest wound, and here comes Andy Snelling to make sure he treats its hangnail.
They cannot provide absolute ages for all the rocks and minerals.
Yes, they can. Even if they're inaccurate, they still provide absolute ages, because that's just an age expressed with a number and a time unit, which is what radiometric dating does.
The age of the Earth was determined assuming an unobserved evolutionary history.
Absolutely not. The theory of evolution factors into none of this. Quantum physics, chemistry, and geology are uninterested in the variation in allele frequency in populations across generations. The concordance between all of them is just evidence that our models in all of these cases are broadly correct, not a sign of some conspiracy.
That is, regarding the meteorites, that is contrary to the explicit statements of God's word, as I said before.
More's the pity for God's word, I guess. Reality is prior to the Bible, and the Bible is contingent on reality. Therefore, it is reality that is the metric by which to measure the Bible, not the reverse.
Well, as we draw to a close, I want to quickly talk about...
Draw to a close? There's still like 25 minutes left. This feels like going to a Vesper service, and the priest says, "Let us complete our evening prayer unto the Lord," except that the service is only like a third done.
Other methods that have been used to date the age of the Earth. All scientific methods, by the way, are based on unprovable assumptions, even the examples I'm going to give you quickly in a moment.
Yeah, empiricism is itself an unprovable assumption, but the fact that science keeps working means most scientists and even non-scientists just don't care.
What we do is we choose a process whose rate can be measured in the present. We assume certain starting conditions which we believe are reasonable, but we can't prove them because no scientist was there to see them.
Actually, you can demonstrate them because the past is indeed something that can be investigated from the present. Something Andy agrees with because otherwise he couldn't develop a flood model of geology, and yet he is trying to do so, meaning that fundamentally he thinks that eyewitness testimony is not necessary to know things about the past.
And watch them. And then we assume that the rate has been constant. The rate has been constant with time.
No, we don't assume that. We check to see if there's good reason to think that it has or has not been. An example is carbon-14. We know for a fact that the production rate of carbon-14 in the atmosphere has varied over the length of time for which carbon dating is useful. That's why there is a calibration curve for it.
Even though we weren't there to check those decay rates with time, and I'm going to illustrate this so you understand what I'm talking about.
We no more need to be there for billions of years to watch decay rates than we need to watch a giant redwood grow from a seed to know that's how redwoods come into being.
All processes can only ever give a qualitative maximum age for the Earth. There is no absolute scientific proof for the Earth's age.
I mean, short of last Thursdays, I'm sure you can give a minimum age. If it took 5,000 years for a tree to grow, the Earth couldn't be younger than that. If it took 4 billion years for a zircon to get to its current level of potassium and argon, then the Earth can't be younger than 4 billion years old. The only other option is that God just poofed the universe into existence exactly as if it were, in fact, as old as it seems to be. In that case, there's no scientific difference between age and appearance of age, so the only rational thing to do is to carry on talking about the old age.
And so there's been many methods that have been used to date the Earth historically and can do so today.
This beating around the bush is getting exhausting.
What most people don't realise that only 10% give an old age.
I'm still going to need to see a citation for that. Who wants to bet most of examples for dating are actually not ways to date anything at all?
Over 90% give a young age. Let me give you a few quick examples. Comets. Comets are essentially dirty snowballs.
Oh boy, here we go. This is going to be dumb.
They're ice and dust. So when a comet comes past the Earth and comes around towards the sun knocks off some of the ice and dust, and that's what streams out behind it, shines as the tail. And so the comet is actually disintegrating.
That's true.
And most of the comets we've watched, we've seen them come back and that's why Halley's Comet is not as spectacular every time as it returns, because it's progressively disintegrating. And the comets are said to be as old as the solar system itself.
Yes, but we know for a fact that their orbits approaching the sun are not that old. This is just figuring out how long a comet can persist in a sun-grazing orbit once it's in one. This tells us nothing about the age of the solar system, unless of course Snelling wants to argue that gravity isn't a thing, because that's the only way to make this work.
But the lifetime of these comets is less than 10,000 years.
Only after their perihelion is lowered to below the frost line. Until then, their lifespan is more or less indefinite.
After 10,000 years, they should have all been gone.
After 10,000 years, I'm free!
But there's still some around.
Yup, because there's this little thing called gravity, which means that when comets that don't approach close to the sun interact, one of them may have its perihelion lowered. Then subsequent interaction with bodies like Saturn and Jupiter tend to lower it to inside the inner solar system. That's why the only way for this to work as a dating mechanism is if Snelling can show that there are no comets that do not approach closely to the sun. We happen to know from both observations as well as mathematical analysis that at least two reserves of comets exist, the Kuiper Belt and the Oort cloud.
So that means the solar system is less than 10,000 years.
What you just said is one of the most insanely idiotic things I have ever heard. At no point in your rambling, incoherent response were you even close to anything that could be considered a rational thought. Everyone in this room is now dumber for having listened to it. I award you no points, and may God have mercy on your soul.
The Earth has a magnetic field.
That's true.
It's generated by electric currents in the Earth's core, and with real-time measurements have shown that the strength and energy of the Earth's magnetic field is getting weaker and weaker, halves itself every 1,400 years.
Weird that he's willing to say that when he's not willing to allow that level of reliability to radiometric dating, given that the rate of radiometric decay is determined by the fundamental forces of the universe, whereas the strength of the magnetic field is contingent on the state of Earth's interior, which is very subject to change. One group of people that are subject to change but won't be used fraudulently as a pretend dating method by creationists are my subscribers. Why not check to see if you're subscribed right now, and if you're not, go ahead and subscribe. Also, check to see if you have all notifications turned on. While you're doing that, please feel free to like this video, as it's one of the few ways the algorithm here actually notices me.
So in other words, 1,400 years ago, the Earth's magnetic field was twice as strong as it is today.
Well, yes, if the rate is constant. Is it?
We also know that the Earth's magnetic field reversed during the flood.
Oh, okay, so Snelling knows it isn't constant, so this makes it useless as a dating technique on its own.
Why? Because all the movement of the lavas inside the Earth, the molten rock coming out, that affected the balance of the Earth's magnetic field and it changed direction.
In order to do that, it had to drop to zero strength momentarily, then come screaming back, meaning that the field strength of the Earth's magnetosphere can go up in absolute terms. Again, meaning that we know that a simple half-life for the field strength simply isn't something we can extend into the past.
So here's these, and so that would also cause a more rapid loss of energy.
Non sequitur. Your facts are uncoordinated.
I'm going to need a citation on that, because most of the energy actually comes from nuclear decay, and field reversals aren't going to change that.
And if you look at these historic measurements, they confirm a rapid loss. If we go back in time...
If we go back in time using a chart in which there are no units labeled and there is no citation for the study being used to make this chart. Yeah, okay.
And we can check this. We can take magnetic particles in pottery that we know the archaeological age of and biblical age of, and we can test the magnetic field that was there when the potter made the pots, and we know that it was stronger in the past.
We do, but we also test magnetic field strength in some igneous rocks, going all the way deep into the planet's past, and guess what? There is no overall weakening trend. But also, notice how Andy is okay with using present rates and measurements in the present to infer the past state of a system without an eyewitness account? I thought that was something that creationists didn't like to do. I guess it's just something that they don't like when it doesn't suit them, but when they think it does, even though it really never does, then they're okay with it. Nice double standard there.
And so if we go back in time, the Earth's magnetic field back 10,000 years ago would have been as strong as a magnetic star.
Which is physically impossible short of the Earth being condensed into degenerate matter made of nuclear pasta. So we know that something is wrong with this model.
Well, that doesn't make sense because the Earth wouldn't be able to cope with a magnetic field that strong.
Yep, which means that it doesn't work. And the fact that we can measure the field strength deep into the past and that there's no overall 14,000-year half-life, this whole thing is a moot point.
So the maximum age of the Earth from the magnetic field decay is only less than 10,000 years.
No, it means that you can't use the field strength of Earth's magnetosphere to calculate its age.
What about the Earth's oceans?
I'm not the biggest fan, but that's because I was in the US Navy helping murder people for no reason on the other side of the globe, all while being abused by the government I was trying to support. I guess that's not actually the ocean's fault, but it still means I don't really ever need to be on the ocean again.
They're getting salty. All that salt that gets washed down by rivers ends up in the oceans.
Hey, fun fact, the rate of erosion is variable, which means that the rate of salt going into the ocean is also variable. But I'm sure there will be even more problems with this.
And we can figure out how much salt is going in and how much salt is coming out of the ocean.
We sure can.
And we can take sodium. Sodium chloride is common salt, but there's other salts. And we can figure out that the Earth's oceans, if we start, as they say, with a freshwater ocean,
which we probably can't, but okay.
Which they claim is 3 billion years old. But wait a minute.
I'm waiting.
The salt we got today in the ocean would get there in a maximum of only 62 million years.
If we assume that the rate of salt entering the ocean and leaving the ocean was constant, and that the former was higher than the latter, we know all of those things to be false. Creationists love to project things that we know we can't into the past indefinitely, while rejecting doing so with things that we know can be so projected. Spontaneous decay is based on the fundamental and, as far as we know, unalterable forces of the universe. Probably something that fluctuates. Salt accumulation based on things we know to change like erosion, subduction, and chemical processes? Probably been the same unalterably since time began.
But wait a minute. Wait a minute. Would God have started with a freshwater ocean?
I don't know, man. I'm not a theologian.
No, he made saltwater fish.
How does Snelling know he didn't just make freshwater fish and then later some of them adapted to saltwater? I mean, if the oceans are getting saltier, as he says, which they're not really in the long run, but whatever, then they'd have to adapt to increasing salinity either way.
Okay, so we're probably wrong about the initial assumption of a fresh ocean. See, this is what I mean about you got to assume the starting conditions.
Is he just doing the job of debunking this for me? I mean, it's okay if he is, it's just a weird thing for him to do.
And then, remember I said that erosion takes salts and puts them in rivers that takes them down to the ocean, it makes it saltier. When would there have been a lot of erosion that put a lot of salt in the ocean?
The Carnian pluvial event, when it rained much more than typical for like 2 million years?
During the flood.
Right, I forgot. We're in fantasy land of physically impossible events, unicorns, and violating the laws of physics for funsies.
Most of the Earth's salt, the salt in the ocean, probably got there during the flood.
I disagree. I think it was actually the body fluids of all the aliens that the galactic overlord Zeno dropped into the Hawaiian volcanoes 1 trillion years ago.
So that age of 62 million years is way, way too big because it's based on the wrong assumptions. But that's a maximum qualitative age.
Except, that it's not, because salt goes out of the ocean. What it's actually measuring is the average stay time for sodium chloride in the Earth's ocean right now. That's it.
What about biological materials? You've all heard about the dinosaur soft tissue?
Nope, not doing it. I've done this one so many times, I'm not doing it again. Suffice it to say that there are preservation mechanisms which were unknown, but are now well known, and that the tissue isn't soft until after it takes a nice long acid bath. And Mark Armitage has never actually demonstrated that his Triceratops even was a Triceratops. I'm skipping this one.
And then radiocarbon.
Oh good, we can hear about more examples of someone doing a study to show the conditions that mean that you can't reliably carbon date something, which Snelling then pretends invalidates the technique in all other cases. One fun thing, though, is that creationists like to use carbon dating for things like biblical manuscripts, because it shows that the manuscript evidence for what the text of the Bible is rather old, and really pretty good as ancient texts go. And that's true. The Bible has an excellent collection of manuscripts, and there's very little question in virtually every case as to what the text said originally when it was compiled or composed. Of course, they'll then turn around and poo-poo one of the reasons that we can say that about the Bible, because the same technique shows that many organic materials are far too old for the young Earth creationist timeline to be true.
You know, we took, and I did this work too back in the 1990s, but during a project that I was involved in, we took 10 coal samples from all around the US that were stored in a Department of Energy repository under special conditions to preserve them. And we sent them for radiocarbon dating, and they all got the same radiocarbon age, even though they were supposedly millions of years old.
Yeah, so a few things. Coal generally comes from fairly deep underground, a location known to have radiation that can induce the creation of new carbon-14 from nitrogen-14. Further, all the coal creationists tested came back with a radiocarbon age at basically the maximum for the technique. So it's a bit like measuring the mass of your car on your kitchen scale, and then concluding that I guess your car has a mass of only half a kilo, since that's how high the scale reads. Even though that's the maximum value it can read. Further, many creationist tests actually didn't test directly for carbon-14, but rather they checked for beta decay, which in some cases can be a reasonable proxy for carbon-14, but in the case of something from deep underground that could have all sorts of other radioactive nuclides in it, many of which decay via beta decay, it is not a reasonable proxy.
Most people don't realise that if every atom of the Earth was radiocarbon, it will all be gone in a million years. There'd be none left. That's why they don't date dinosaur fossils with radiocarbon.
That's, I suppose, one of the reasons. The real reason is that carbon-14 dating only works on original organic material, and by and large, dinosaur fossils are not original organic material, but have had all of their original material replaced by minerals that have taken the shape of the original organic material.
And yet the interesting thing, every fossil that's been tested, every coal sample, every oil sample that's been tested has got radiocarbon in it.
That is interesting, in that it's interesting that there are induced nuclear reactions going on underground, but then that's something we've known for a long time. Also, though, we have the same problem that we had with Austin's wind current basalt testing. The test chambers for carbon-14 testing can't be completely evacuated, so they always give an age somewhere around the maximum age, even if you load them with no sample at all. So in some cases, it's actually not clear that these samples have any carbon-14 at all, although some of them probably do.
Which means those materials aren't that old.
No, God! No, God, please, no! 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 No!
And when you consider the Earth's magnetic field was stronger in the past,
which is not broadly true,
that affects the rate of radiocarbon formation in the atmosphere.
Good thing that's well known, and we have calibration curves to account for it.
And so those ages are even way too large.
No.
The interesting thing is we found that no matter whether the coal sample was supposedly 40 million years old or 300 million years old, it had the same radiocarbon age. Why?
Because they were abusing the techniques in an effort to dishonestly discredit them.
Because they were all trees that were alive the day before the flood.
Yeah, I suppose that's a possibility too, as long as you ignore the impossibility of the flood as Snelling thinks it happened.
They all died at the same time, so they should give you the same age.
Except that the age is way too old and is conveniently right at the maximum age that you could possibly get, which means that really the age given is use another measuring tool, because this one is maxed out.
And you know, diamonds, we've even looked at diamonds that are supposedly 1 to 3 billion years old, and they've got radiocarbon in them.
Everything I said about coal and fossils applies to diamonds.
They're the hardest known substance that can't be contaminated.
Diamonds don't block neutron radiation in any meaningful way as a result of being hard. What is Snelling smoking? It must be some real good shit, because being hard doesn't stop nitrogen impurities from becoming carbon-14 when they're hit by a stray neutron. And of course, these two gave dates at the maximum range of carbon-14 dating, meaning that the results are basically what you get if you tested literally an empty chamber.
What about why are there so few human fossils, by the way? And there's no human fossils from before the flood because God said he was going to utterly destroy man, blot him out.
Does that mean no fossils? That seems like a reach to give a flimsy textual reason for the otherwise unexplained absence of human fossils from what Snelling thinks of as flood rock, which is not at all what we should expect from a worldwide flood wiping out human civilization.
Why are there so few Stone Age human remains?
Because human bodies don't normally persist indefinitely.
They say that the Stone Age lasted for 185 million years. You know,
excuse me, the did you just say?
Who said that? Homo sapiens hasn't even been around a million years, and hominins for less than 7 million years by most estimates. How could the Stone Age have been going on for 180 million years longer than hominins have even existed? What the is Snelling talking about?
we'll come to this in a moment, but how long did it take to produce the 8 billion people that are alive today?
300,000 years or so.
Not very long at all. So where are all the Stone Age fossils of humans?
Museums and in the ground.
We don't find their graves.
Yes we do. See what I mean about how dishonest this is? The existence of human remains from the Stone Age is well known. They're in museums all over the world. I've seen some of them in person.
Where are their remains? We only find thousands.
I'd love to see the math on that.
And so I could go on. All these methods.
Don't it all work as dating methods for the age of the Earth? I agree.
By the way, I should have told you, okay? What about the human population? I didn't include this, but I'll add it.
Oh god, it's about to get super dumb. Get your face protection.
If you start with Noah and his family 4,500 years ago, with a growth rate of human population growth rate slower than today's rate, you get the population today in all that time.
Yeah, but only if you use the basic compound interest exponential growth formula. We'll assume a starting population of 6 because it seems like Noah and Mrs. Noah didn't have any more kids. So this works if the population growth rate is between 0.47 and 0.48%. But what does that mean if for the population of the Earth when Abram leaves the city of Ur and travels to Egypt in Genesis? Well, according to the Answers Research blog, Abram left Ur some time after 2900 BCE, but before 2750 BCE. We'll use the later date to be nice to the creationists. So 440,000 minus 2,750 is 1,650. We'll plug that into our population growth formula, and we find that the whole Earth had 16,200 people in it. That means that we have to divide that population between cities like Eridu, Uruk, Ur, Ashdod, Asilag, and that's just a few of the ones in the ancient Near East. There were cities in India and China, and the Americas were full of people, not to mention Egypt. If we just assume that Mesopotamia, China, India, and Egypt were the only civilizations, and that there were no people just living outside of the civilized area, which we know isn't true, then all of Egypt had at best 4,050 people in it, themselves split between several cities. Heck, that would mean that a good guess for the population of Ur when Abram left would be under 1,350. Actual population estimates for Ur, for most of its history, are more like 65,000 people, which is, almost 10 times the population of the whole Earth according to this stupid argument.
If evolution were true and man evolved 1 million years ago, there ought to be one person on every square foot of the Earth's surface with 16 other people stacked on their shoulders.
Yes, because there are literally no constraints on population growth besides just how many people there are having sex at any given moment in a way that can result in pregnancy. That's how this works. Hey, let's apply this to rabbits, which conveniently are not kosher. So we start with only 2. Now rabbits give birth sometimes up to 2 times a year, but we'll only go with once a year, and they have between 5 and 8 kids. We'll take the lower estimate. That means that every year the rabbit population will grow by a factor of 2.5. So let's plug that into the formula. 2 times 2.5 to the 4,400th power, and oh look, it breaks my calculator and just gives me an infinity symbol. In fact, if rabbits work the same way Snelling thinks that humans work, then in only 7 years there will be 7.2 times 10 to the 278th power rabbits. There are only about 10 to the 80th power electrons in the observable universe. Maybe it's the case that simple population growth formulae don't actually work in the real world in the long term. You see, there are things like famines, wars, plagues, etc. Also, environments have this thing called carrying capacity, which is the maximum number of any particular organism that an environment can support. Obviously, the Earth can't support more rabbits than there are electrons, so it never will. Similarly, the Earth can't support 10 to the 611th power humans or even close to it, which is the number you get if you put 300,000 years into the calculations with a 4.7 per annum population growth into the formula. So no matter how old humanity is, they won't even get close to that.
Where are they all?
They never existed, because populations don't just smoothly increase over time, because that's absolutely insane and would even invalidate young Earth creationism.
So you see, many of these methods give a young age.
Too bad none of them hold up to even a microgram of scrutiny, though, isn't it?
All scientific evidence for the age of the Earth, as I said before, involves unprovable assumptions. There were no human witnesses there to check those assumptions.
It's like he's the incarnation of hypocrisy.
All these methods can only ever give you a maximum qualitative age.
Okay, buddy, you keep thinking that.
Our only certainty is the God-breathed eyewitness account in the scriptures of the Earth's age and history.
I thought unproven assumptions were a bad thing, though. But only if they're the unproven assumptions that Snelling likes.
So, why should the observations of the world around us by finite, fallible, fallen humans, interpreted by rejecting the authority of God's word, be given precedence over the clear statements of God's breathed eyewitness account in the scriptures?
Because that's where all the evidence points. It's really that simple.
And you see, this is where I take issue with Christians who have compromised.
I don't care. I'm skipping all this whining about Christians who have decided to not be blatantly wrong about reality. I'm skipping his theology stuff. I don't care about it. I will say he managed to discuss the creation of humans without going into overt transphobia, so that's nice. Credit where it's due. We're skipping to the Q&A because the next, 5 minutes was nothing but preaching.
Okay, so I take the boys to the Field Museum, and we've got all the dinosaurs and all the big layouts and 40, million different artifacts of saying this is 300 years old, 300 million years old. How do I explain to the boys, oh, this whole place is wrong?
Don't explain that, because it's not. Just accept the science. It's that simple.
Well, you have to say that these are man's ideas about the age of these fossils.
You know what? No, this is my channel. I'm not going to let Snelling advocate for lying to children on a platform I control. Sorry, time for the next question.
Yes, that was a pretty detailed explanation of rock dating, and I think we're probably all here in the minority on the education of that.
What does that even mean?
So it would seem to me that the scientific community should have an overseer of a committee that could validate or invalidate rock dating methods, because it seems to me that that whole scientific dating method is askew.
It does. It's called peer review.
And needs to be reevaluated. So why isn't that happening? And are you the only Christian geologist? There's got to be some kind of grassroots effort.
There are, in fact, many Christian geologists. It's just that they're basically all old earthers because they're neither stupid nor liars. In fact, when he actually does geology work, Snelling is also an old earther.
Well, there's other Christian geologists like me who believe in God's word and the flood and the creation account.
Right. Liars and frauds like Steve Austin.
The interesting thing is that the geologist community trust that those who do the rock dating are very, very minor group.
The geologist community trusts that those who do the rock dating are a very, very minor group. That's not a meaningful phrase.
And they've got world-class laboratories. I mean, they've spent millions and millions of taxpayers' dollars building these laboratories, I can tell you that now.
Better that than the well over $1 trillion spent by the USA on killing people across the globe. So,
And so the analyses are very good, and most of the geologists don't understand these problems. They've never been shown that there are these problems.
No, they understand them very well. That's why they write about them. Like Dalrymple. It's just that they're not the problems that Snelling has to lie to make them out to be. None of this is hidden. That's why Dalrymple and his colleagues publish in real journals, not online LARP blogs with strict formatting requirements, like the Answers Research Journal. Okay, after this, he just keeps lying about the geochronology field, just not knowing about things that they themselves write about, which is so bonkers, I'm skipping the rest of it because it's boring. It's a lie, and frankly, I need to get to the end of this because it's starting to make me go a bit crazy, which is a surprisingly frequent thing that happens when I'm finishing up a script.
You touched on it a little bit, but why are there no human fossils?
There absolutely should be if most humans, around the time of the flood, drowned in it. The flood preserved delicate insect wings, according to Snelling, but it couldn't preserve a single human? That seems to beggar belief.
Okay, well, because God said to Noah, and he repeated it, that he was going to destroy the earth with man.
So God miraculously erased the evidence of the flood? I mean, that's certainly a take. I think it gives all the more reason to reject the historicity of the global flood, since that kind of a god is epistemic poison. But hey, if Snelling wants an omnipotent version of Loki as his god, I can't tell him not to do it.
And it says the Hebrew says he was going to blot man out. Okay? Now remember what happened to King Saul? He was told to go and wipe out the Amalekites.
So just doubling down on magic.
We don't do that here.
I'm skipping the magic stuff.
The only hint we get is in some parts of the geologic record, we get phosphate rock. There's places where it's mined for fertilizer. And the phosphate rock has the same composition as our teeth and bones.
That kind of stretch would make Mr. Armstrong proud.
Stretch him 4 times his size.
So it's possible that when the fountains of the great deep broke open, they were hot volcanic waters that were acidic. They dissolved all the human flesh and the bones. And then when they went to cooler areas, the phosphate precipitated out in those layers. I don't know.
So why did this only happen to humans? Why do we have any body fossils at all? Shouldn't that have happened to more or less everything? Are humans particularly susceptible to acid damage, but all dinosaurs have acid resistance? Do we need to update the D20 stat blocks for dinosaurs?
But we've got to be honest with the evidence.
Well, when Snelling does that, he manages to publish real papers. Too bad for him, they all support the old Earth, because let's be honest, he knows better. He's just a liar.
God hasn't left any record of the pre-flood world of humans. No record of civilization. There's no genuinely verifiable artifacts or human remains from the pre-flood world.
Because it never existed, because there was no flood. That's the takeaway from that.
All the human remains we find are in the superficial layers that represent the people that lived after the flood.
Superficial is a cool word. Also, that's the only human remains we find because humans are recent arrivals on Earth. It's that simple. We don't need convoluted acid miracles to explain this.
And by the way, I know it takes up an extra minute, but in Africa, you find the primate fossils.
The oldest primate fossils are actually in North America, but go on.
In layers below where you've got the human remains. Well, what happened after the flood?
Noah got super drunk and cursed one of his kids for pulling up his robe to expose his passed out dad's junk.
People disobeyed God and stayed at Babel, but the animals dispersed.
Weird then how, despite the fact that the plain of Shinar is in Mesopotamia, that the oldest human remains are in Africa, which is also where the majority of human genetic diversity is. It's almost like this story directly contradicts the actual evidence.
So the animals got to Africa first, and then the humans later. That's why they're buried in that order.
Oh, so that's why there are no animals buried lower than the first humans in the Middle East, right? Oh, wait. That's not right. Oops.
And the geologists come along and say, oh, this must have evolved into this. No, they were just buried at different times.
Well, I guess that's it. I'm pretty disappointed in how that ended, but then I almost always am. So we got a whole lot of Snelling pretending that well-known limitations of a technique invalidate the technique, lying about a conspiracy to defraud the public out of the knowledge of the truth of the Bible, and a bunch of made-up dating techniques that do nothing to actually establish the age of anything, let alone the Earth. That's it. Oh well, if you enjoyed this video, then please feel free to hit like, and if you didn't, then feel free to hit dislike. Either way, let me know what you thought in the comments, and subscribe to the channel if you haven't. If you subscribe now or are already subscribed, check to make sure that you have notifications turned on so you're always notified when I have new content. I'm the Dapper Dinosaur. Hey, before you leave, I just want to take a second to thank my patrons and channel members, especially those pledging $20 or above. Ben Tovend, Philgevara, Tapioca Weasel, Whispers, E2V, Strawberry Vein, Denny5252, Elron Teller, Horseflesh, Ian Chen, Kelvin Brostick Van Manen, Landon Knoll, Mabbity Babbity, Monkey They Them, Sphincter of Doom, and Volus. It's because of my channel members and patrons whom you're seeing on screen that this channel can stay afloat. Without you, it would all shut down. If you want to join the team, there's a link to join the channel below this video, and there's a link to join the Patreon in the description. On the Patreon, you can get a 10% discount for pledging annually, and either way, you get early access to virtually all of my scripted videos, often 3 to 5 months before they come out for the general public. Thanks for watching.